Today's edition of Mac Voices is supported by MacVoices Magazine, our free Flipboard magazine that brings you some of the best Mac, iPhone, and iPad productivity tips on the web. High in signal, low in noise, just like MacVoices, MacVoices Magazine includes information on how you can get more out of your Apple technology. Subscribe at macvoices.com/magazine or search for MacVoices Magazine on Flipboard. And by the MacVoices Dispatch, our weekly newsletter to stay up to date on all the MacVoices news. Subscribe from our front page or at macvoices.com/newsletter. Welcome to Mac Voices. This is the Talk of the Mac community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, I've been saying it's Take Control time a lot, it seems, and that's because it's Take Control time. And that means Joe Kissell is back with us with a new Take Control book. This time, it's Take Control of Peripherals Desktop 12. Joe, great to have you as always. Thanks for taking the time.
My pleasure.
It's always fun. It's always fun. And this is a brand new Take Control book. Am I right?
It is brand new. I mean, it covers, let's say, familiar territory. I mean, way back when Apple first switched to using Intel chips, and Macs first became able to run Windows, I wrote a book called Take Control of Running Windows on Your Mac. And that was very popular for a while. And then I did a book called Take Control of VMware Fusion about using that particular app to run Windows on your Mac. And that was very popular for a while too. VMware sponsored it. And for years, I was trying to present my fair and balanced approach. I wanted to have the book on VMware Fusion, which was one of the major virtualization apps, but I also wanted to have a book on Parallels Desktop, which was really the first one. It came, well before VMware Fusion. And what with one thing and another, we were never able to pull it off because these sorts of books, we have to have the involvement of the developer in order to reach a big enough audience to make it make sense. And we were just never able to kind of get it together with Parallels, but we finally did. I'm delighted. So I wish the book could have been done, 6 or 7 years ago, but better late than never. Especially since the VMware Fusion seems like its popularity is kind of waning due to reasons. But anyway, very, very happy to finally have the other book on the other way to run Windows on your Mac.
Without getting into a lot of ancillary stuff, I think you're right. Fusion does seem to the developers have taken their eye off the ball for whatever reason. That may be the best way to say it. And so now we're looking, and now we're looking to Parallels as sort of the top of the heap, most current, best way to run Windows on your Mac if you have to run Windows on your Mac. Yeah,
and I don't mean to diss Fusion or VMware in any way.
No.
I still have it installed on my Mac. It still works. It seems as though they're kind of lagging behind. For all I know, maybe I'll wake up tomorrow and they introduce a brand new version. It's happened before. But regardless of what they do or don't do, Parallels is very, very much up to date. It's working just fine. You can run, Windows 10, you can run Sierra, you can run Android, you can run Chromium OS, whatever you like. And I've done all the above.
And that's probably an important point to make here, that I just said Windows, but this is really a virtualization software. So it gives you virtual machines, not necessarily just a Windows machine.
Yeah, certainly Windows, and Parallels has given me statistics of how many of what proportion of their users use various versions of Windows and which use various versions of Linux and so forth. And certainly Windows is far and away the most popular guest operating system to run. But some people also need to run Linux. Some people need to run DOS. Some people need to run OS2. There must be a few of them out there. And some people need to run Android. I sometimes run Android on my Mac if I need to test software that I'm writing about. So great, whatever you need. And even, so like, not to get too far off topic, but today, Sierra has not been released yet. It's been in public beta for quite some time. And I've been installing those betas. I've been installing them inside Parallels because I don't want to mess up my main system. Like, I got work to do, and I don't. I want to test Sierra because I'm writing about that too. But I want to keep it in a box, sort of, so that it doesn't interfere with other things, or if there's something weird beta thing goes wrong, that I'm not messing up all my data. So no problem. I just install it on a virtual machine, and it's really great to be able to even run one version of OS 10 or Mac OS inside another one. If I still needed to run, Snow Leopard for some reason, I could do that in Parallels. So yeah, it's kind of an all-purpose way to run one version of an operating system inside another, and it's most commonly used to run Windows on your Mac.
So at the risk of asking you to confess to something, is this something that we can do legitimately now, that we can run the Mac OS inside a virtual machine? Because for a while, wasn't it prohibited?
Yeah. So I would have to consult my notes to remind myself of exactly when the switch occurred. For a while, for a while, like way back when, it was prohibited. And then Apple said you can do it, but only if you're running the server version of OS 10 in a virtual machine. That was the case for Snow Leopard, and it might have been the case for Lion too. But 2, 3, 4 versions ago, Apple dropped that requirement, and they've officially legally opened it up. There are no legal or technical barriers to running, Yosemite, El Capitan, or Sierra in a virtual machine. So that's totally on the up and up. I used to have to go through these little hacks, little contortions to get the non-server versions of OS 10 to run in a virtual machine years ago. No longer have to do that, so it's all good.
This is exciting to me, just because I ran across a piece of software just this week that the developer has not kept up on, and I'm really interested in running the quote-unquote old version, which would be Yosemite, but it will not run. Actually, there's a new version that is less capable because the developer has dropped the ball. Seems like that's a theme here. So the ability for me to set up a virtual machine, go back and run an older version of the Mac OS just to run that piece of software, wow, that would be very handy.
It is very handy. So I'm all about. I've written about upgrading to the new version of OS 10 so many times, and I don't necessarily always have the latest hardware, but I do. I'm very much into keeping all my software up to date, if at all possible, and these things do happen occasionally where there's something you really want to use, but it's not compatible with the latest version of OS 10, and this is one way to kind of have your cake and eat it too.
Okay, so I'll get into some specific questions later, but let's talk about Parallels Desktop 12. What is new? What makes it 12, other than just the version number? What enhancements are we seeing to this version?
Well, I think really the biggest enhancement is that it now has a third-party book about it.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
So, I was, just before we started this, I was looking over my list here of all the changes. Of course, Sierra support as both host and guest is new. And there are a lot of, it's better support for Retina displays, better support for multiple displays if you have, 2, 3 displays hooked up on your Mac. Better support for full screen view and split view, and a special version of full screen view for games. And a lot of little tweaks, like little performance enhancements and optimization kinds of things. And there's a very long list of these small changes, most of which are kind of, you're like, well, that's nice. It's not huge. It's, unless you particularly need to run Sierra, or you need to use, Parallels with an external display or something. A lot of these things you're going to well, that's nice. It's nice that I can set up Parallels so that it runs all the maintenance stuff in Windows, like, downloading software updates and dealing with caches and stuff at a specific fixed time overnight, rather than interrupting your work to do that. So great. And there are more options for installing sort of pre-built virtual machines from Microsoft, like, download various combinations of different versions of Windows with different versions of Internet Explorer or Edge, so that you can, like, for testing web development and stuff. But none of these things are really by themselves all that huge. One of the biggest features, I'm saying sort of biggest in air quotes here, is something they're calling Parallels Toolbox. And Parallels Toolbox is a little bit, it requires a little bit of explanation. It's an odd thing. So basically what it is a collection of utilities, each of which does exactly one small thing. They're all one-trick ponies. And there are, I forget, 20 odd utilities in this collection. And there's like different, for taking screenshots and doing, video recordings of your whole screen or different parts of your screen, and archiving files and unarchiving files, and muting your microphone and keeping your Mac from going to sleep. And I'm just looking at the list here. Recording audio, downloading videos, like, you want to download a YouTube video or something, hiding your desktop, locking your screen, turning on Do Not Disturb, bunch of things like that. And they are all things that you can do in other ways. Some of them you can do if you just know the right keyboard shortcut or if you have the right utility installed on your Mac. But what Parallels Toolbox does is it makes all of these things as, like, brain-dead simple as they can possibly be. There's now a menu up in your menu bar, and you click this, there's all the tools. You want to take a screenshot, you click that, and click on what you want a screenshot of, and you're done. Now, if you are the sort of person, like me, who takes many, many screenshots every day, you probably have a utility that you really like for doing that. There are many of them, and you have your own workflow with Photoshop or whatever it is you do. And these are not high-powered tools. They're not going to replace, like, the screen recording. It's fine. It does what it's supposed to do. It's not going to replace ScreenFlow if you're doing screencasts. But if you're not the sort of person who's going to drop $100 or more on a professional app like that, you just want to occasionally do like a little quick record what's going on my screen, then this is fine. So basically it takes a lot of capabilities that you can get in other ways and makes them a lot easier to get to. And the idea is that depending on which edition of Parallels you buy and whether you sign up for a subscription and various other things, they're going to add to this as the months go on, and your subscription will sort of get, you do the automatic update one day and you're like, oh, look, I got 4 new tools. Isn't that great? So I don't have any intelligence about, what are those future components going to be. But it's a way that Parallels can make some things easier for you, whether you're doing these things inside a virtual machine or in OS X. It's weird in that, I mean, it's nice. They're all fine. They're nice to have. It's weird in that these things don't require a virtual machine to be running. They don't even require Parallels itself to be running. So it's sort of an independent product that's kind of bundled with Parallels Desktop. It seems like they have ideas for where it's going to go in the future that this version 1.0 doesn't quite show you. But there it is. It's some cool new features that you will get. Other things, like, if you've been using Parallels Desktop for a while, you may be really happy about new developer settings, new network conditioner settings, real-time virtual disk optimization can now be enabled per virtual machine instead of globally. And like, I think a lot of people will go, what is that and why should I care? But, for certain kinds of users, people who have a dozen different virtual machines because they're writing software or they're designing websites and they're constantly testing things in a bunch of different places, those are the ones that I think are going to find all these new little tweaks to be the most interesting and exciting and useful.
So I want to be clear on the toolbox. These are capabilities that you aren't necessarily using within the virtual machine, that you could use them with your normal Mac
Yeah,
OS.
yeah, absolutely. Even if Parallels Desktop itself is not running, I can go up here to the Parallels Toolbox menu and say, "Oh, I need a stopwatch." So 2 clicks, I got a stopwatch. 2 clicks, I can set like a time or date countdown, or I can say I want to turn on the I want to prevent my Mac from going to sleep because whatever, I'm downloading something. So all these tools are available in Mac OS, whether or not Parallels Desktop is even running.
Okay, that's good to know. I mean, that's a nice feature set, especially if you haven't invested in some of those utilities. If you have, they're great utilities, and like you say, you probably have your own workflow. But if not,
Yeah.
this would give you just another reason to play with it.
Yeah.
Joe, it seems like when we do certain things, certain topics or certain software pieces, I end up asking a lot of the same questions, and it's not a formula. It's just I think we need to go back over it because things change.
Sure.
That's been true of backups especially. But in this scenario, you're running all these machines, you're putting different OSs on. They may not be up-to-date OSs, and therefore they may have security vulnerabilities. How much danger am I creating here for my Mac and for my data outside the virtual machine?
Well, it can range anywhere from 0 to, oh my God, an awful lot. So
let's talk about oh my God, an awful lot first.
Yeah. So let's say that you installed the original version of Windows XP for some bizarre reason.
Wow.
You would want to take some really special measures to clamp down security, because if you just like do nothing other than install the original version of Windows XP on a machine and connect it to the internet, bad things are going to happen. So the fact that you're running in a virtual machine, assuming default settings, gives you a little bit of protection because you're sort of on an isolated, first of all, your Mac is probably connected to a router that probably uses NAT, so that you have like the private IP address that is given to you by your router, and then you have a public IP address that is given to your router by your ISP. And the fact that your machine goes through any kind of router gives you a certain amount of protection against people trying to get in from the outside. Again, depending on many, many variables, how you have it set up, default configurations and whatnot. When you create a virtual machine, it's like you've added another layer onto that. So a hypothetical attacker from the outside now has a little more work to do, have to go through sort of 2 layers. Now, Parallels has a mode in which, and it has these various networking modes, and it has one networking mode in which basically your virtual machine, Windows or whatever, can only communicate with your own Mac over the network. It cannot see the outside internet. So if you want to be really, really safe, you could use that mode. It's really easy to turn it on. Now you're going to hate it because now you can't get software updates. You can't surf the web. You can't, but I mean, if you're going to be running an exceptionally unsecure operating system for some useful reason, then you might want to do that. You might want to go through those measures. When you buy Parallels, it's going to offer to install a free 30-day trial version of Kaspersky Internet Security. It's going to offer to install a free 30-day trial version of Acronis TrueImage as a backup program. You might want to really take those offers under advisement if you don't already have a Windows anti-malware app of some kind. You might really want to install that one or some other one that in your virtual machines, and this is much more the case if they are older. The more modern versions of Windows, like the more modern versions of OS X, are better protected against malware, not totally protected. But the farther back you go, the more precautions you want to take. The nice thing about running a virtual machine is that even if you get some really nasty virus and it does very bad things to Windows, it's most likely going to be isolated to that virtual machine. Now, you can, again, it depends. You know, if you've set up all kinds of sharing between macOS 10 and your virtual machine, there are ways you can get yourself into trouble for sure. Hopefully, you won't do that. If you're, you know, if playing with fire, then keep the flammable substances away. You know, what can I say? So you have to be a little bit smart about it. You don't want to just assume that technology is going to magically take care of you. You want to be, you know, do this with both eyes open. But as long as you are reasonably smart about your settings, you can keep Windows as isolated from the rest of your Mac as you need it to be.
And pardon me, and is that easy to set up? Is it right there in your face as you set up the virtual machine? Or do I have to know a little bit or do a little research? And I'm sure it's in the book, so that's the first place you should go. But you know,
it's easy to do. The problem is that Parallels Desktop has a million settings, and unfortunately, a lot of those settings are really just for propeller heads. I mean, they're really intensely geeky. It happened many times during the development of this book that I would say, what does this checkbox do? I turn it on, I turn it off, it doesn't seem to have an effect. I can't figure out. Or what about this thing? I know that I can do this, but why would I ever want to do this? And so I talked to the Parallels product manager. He's like, I really have no idea. That's an excellent question. I'm going to go ask the engineers about that, and I'll get back to you. So if you're the type of person who's really technical and you love to tinker, this is great because you can configure anything you want. If you're just like, no, I want to click the Keep Me Safe button. Well, there isn't really a Keep Me Safe button. Once you know, oh, I need to use this networking mode, then it's like 1 or 2 clicks to actually turn that on. But discovering what all these options do and why you might want to use some rather than others, that's a little trickier. And that's really one of the reasons for the book, is to help you wade through this. And like, if there's something that stumps me and it stumps the product manager and the engineers even have to go off and think about it for a while, then of course it's going to stump ordinary people. So that's what I'm trying to do, is to figure this stuff out and say, no, this is what it does. So if you turn it on, this is going to happen. If you turn it on, off, that's going to happen. And here's why you might want to do one or the other.
Sort of along the lines of some of that, how about the interaction between the virtual machine and your host Mac, as far as moving files back and forth? And I realize that some of that overlaps with what you just said about locking things down. But how easy is that? How difficult how easy can you make it?
So there are 2 types of people: people who are like me and people who are wrong.
Okay.
So Parallels, like VMware Fusion, has various different modes in which you can interact with a virtual machine. And I will simplify it by pretending that there are only 2. There are more than 2. We'll pretend there are 2. So in one mode, it's just like a windowed mode. So there's a window on my Mac, and inside that window is Windows. So everything that there's my Windows desktop. There's my start menu down there. There's all my notification, all the stuff. Like it's in a box, and it's as though you're running a Windows computer in a window on your screen. And so in that mode, it's just like, well, there's my Windows PC. Oh, over here's my Mac, and you can switch back and forth just as though you were switching, between apps. At the other extreme, you have this mode in which the Windows desktop disappears, and Windows apps intermingle freely with Mac apps, and they get their own dock icons. And you can forget that you're even running Windows at all. There's no start menu. I mean, you use the start menu is replaced by something in your dock, and you use different menus in your Mac to get at these various Windows capabilities. But you can really blend the two operating systems as much as you like. Now, I personally am a let's keep it isolated in a window kind of guy. But other people are like, I don't want to look at Windows. I just want to see my app, my game, my productivity app, whatever. So if you are that type of person, you can do that. Now, regardless of which viewing mode you use, you can also choose to share files in various ways. So you can say, hey, Windows has a desktop folder. macOS has a desktop folder. Windows has a download folder. macOS has a download folder. Windows has a pictures folder. macOS has a pictures folder. What if they were all the same? So that when I download something, regardless of whether I download it on my Mac or within Windows, it will appear in the same folder, and whichever operating system I'm using, I will see that stuff in that folder. That's fine. You can set that up if you like. I do like that for the most part. I don't want to share all of my folders across, but I do like to have most of those major folders like documents and desktop be shared, so I no longer have to like wonder where a file is or go through contortions to copy it from one operating system to another. It can also kind of go in the opposite direction. So if let's say you use Microsoft OneDrive, and you have the OneDrive app installed in Windows, and so your OneDrive drive, your virtual drive, appears there in Windows, but you don't have the Mac OneDrive app installed. Well, you can share it so that as long as Windows is running in a virtual machine, your Mac can see your OneDrive by way of Windows. So that's all nice. If you really want to have a very seamless experience of exactly the same files show up regardless of your operating system, you totally can. If that makes you nervous, which in some cases that would be a valid worry, just don't turn on those features, and you can have it however, share whatever you want. Don't share what you don't want. If you by default you share your clipboard. Copy something in Windows, paste it in Mac, and vice versa. By default, you can drag and drop something from your Mac desktop into Windows and vice versa. If you don't want it to do that, no problem, turn it off.
Okay, that's good. Honestly, I'd forgotten about that blending mode where you don't have to have the virtual machine running in its own window, that you can just have the functionality. So that's a great reminder for that. And that is tempting, but I'm kind of like you. I tend to like to have things in that one window so that I know what I'm doing, where I'm doing it.
Yeah.
I don't think this is as big a deal as it used to be because we've gotten away from CD drives and DVD drives. But how about the interaction with external peripherals that are plugged into your Mac? Internet connection obviously is probably the biggest one right now, but you still have printers, scanners. You might plug in thumb drives, external hard drives, and all those things. Is that a pretty seamless sharing, or is it you have to jump through some hoops?
Yeah, so Parallels does a really nice job with sharing printers. So by default, whatever printers you've set up on your Mac are also available within Windows, and you don't have to do anything. They're just there. You don't have to use that feature, and you can set up additional features, additional printers in Windows that you don't have set up in OS X. Things like thumb drives and whatever external storage, it's super easy. Again, highly configurable. What will normally happen if you're running Windows on your Mac and you plug in some external device, USB device, in certain cases a Thunderbolt device, a little thing will pop up on the screen and say, okay, do you want to give this to macOS 10 or do you want to give it to Windows? And you say, oh, well, actually, I just plugged in my iPhone. And no, I don't want Windows to see my iPhone. I want my Mac to see my iPhone. So you click on that and then you're done. And you can just say, and by the way, remember this forever. Or if you're like, no, actually, I plugged in this thumb drive because I have a file that I want Windows to see, then you click on the Windows thing and Windows can see it. And there is also a way with storage devices that you can have your cake and eat it too. So I think I've said that before, where you can set it up in such a way that the device that you plug in will show up. It'll mount as like a regular volume on your Mac, but it'll also appear in Windows as a network volume. So won't look the same as if you normally plugged it in Windows, but you can still get at the files. So pretty much everything is like that. You can share cameras, like, you know, what I'm looking into right now, between operating systems. I mean, they can't both use it at exactly the same time, but basically Parallels is pretty smart about sharing any sort of peripheral, and they're mostly pretty easy. I mean, you can certainly get into weird situations, but I've been really, really impressed with the fact that most of their default choices are the sensible ones, the ones that I would hope for, that require, that give you sort of the least friction. So it's really, in the vast majority of cases, it just does what you expect it to do, and it's fine.
Okay, this is a biggie for me, and I think it's a biggie for a lot of people now, because we are, not everybody, but many of us are going to laptops, smaller laptops, therefore less storage, and yet we want all these options. Can I install virtual machines on an external drive and plug it in when I need to and want to?
Yes. Yes, you can. But now that you mentioned laptops, I want to mention a couple of things about Parallels. So on the plus side, Parallels has some really good power saving features. So you can set it up so that if when you disconnect the AC power from your laptop, it automatically switches your virtual machine into a power saving mode. So that's nice. It's nice for your battery. But virtual machines are notoriously disk hungry. And if you are using, a MacBook Air, something with a very small amount of storage, you might have some discomfort using Parallels Desktop. Obviously, I mean, you get to choose how big is your virtual disk going to be, but I mean, Windows needs quite a few gigabytes to do anything useful. So plugging in external storage is fine. There's no problem storing your virtual machine on a flash drive or external hard drive or whatever. I mean, depending on the device, there may be a performance penalty if it's slow. But one thing you should be careful of if you are using Sierra is this great new feature that if you turn it on, can automatically sync your Documents folder on your Mac with iCloud. Now, we'll be talking about this more in a future episode. We're going to come back to this, but that sounds really great in the sense that, oh, well, I have 2 Macs, 3 Macs. Of course, I want everything in my Documents folder to sync across them. But if one of the things in that folder is a 40, 50 gigabyte virtual machine, because by default, Parallels does keep its virtual machines in the Parallels folder in your Documents folder, then all of a sudden that huge thing is syncing up to the cloud all the time. And not only is that going to take a long time, but also, oh, you're going to run out of storage and you have to pay Apple for more. So if you decide to use that feature in Sierra, you might want to consider moving your Parallels folder someplace else. It's no big deal. You just shut off Parallels, move it someplace else, open it back up again, and it's going to say, wait a minute, this file isn't where can you tell me where it is? It wasn't where I was expecting it to be. And you say, oh, it's fine. It's over here now. And so it's not a big deal, but it's just a thing to think about, that if you are planning to use that feature, then your Documents folder is probably not the best place which is the default, probably not the best place to keep your virtual machines. Conversely, if you really want to keep your virtual machines there, you might want to consider not using that new feature in Sierra.
Okay, I want to go back to the question about the external storage.
Yeah.
So I just want to be sure here that I can keep Parallels on, let's say, my MacBook. Yep. And I keep the program there, but I store all the virtual machines offline, or not offline, excuse me, on an external device that I plug in.
Yeah.
There's nothing that gets written into the system folder or user folder or anything that starts to suck up all that space
No, I mean,
because I've had that experience before where it's like, what's going on? Oh my gosh, it's eating my machine because it's storing things within my system, my user folder, and that I didn't really intend to. I intended to keep everything, or at least as much as possible, off on the external drive.
Yeah, so I'm just looking. Parallels Desktop, the app itself is about 565 megabytes, so it's not small, but it's it's about. And I haven't looked in like application support to see how much space it takes up there, and I'm not seeing a folder there, which might mean it doesn't take up any there. That's something I honestly have not looked into recently, so I would have to go back and check. But certainly, by far, the largest chunk of data you need to worry about is the virtual machine itself, and everything is sort of stored in that package. So as long as you move that to an external volume, you should be fine. I don't think you're going to get into a situation where Parallels, the app itself, is storing any other kinds of large files on your internal disk.
And that means that Windows or Yosemite or Lion or whatever it is you've installed in that virtual machine, that's also packaged inside that virtual machine that would be stored off on the other disk.
Yeah. So it's all the settings plus it's like a disk image basically that holds all of your data. And if you do, it has snapshots which are sort of like internal backups. Those are also stored in there, and just pretty much all the data that your virtual machine needs are all stored in this big bundle. So and they can get quite large. Parallels has features to recover any unused space and stuff like that, but there's fundamentally no problem keeping them on another drive.
One thing that just occurred to me, we're talking about having these virtual machines. How secure are they? We were talking earlier about coming in from the outside through the internet, but how about the virtual machine itself that is on that external disk or external drive that maybe I lose, or maybe somebody picks up off my desk and says, "Oh, what's this?" And assuming they would obviously they would have to have a copy of Parallels, but assuming they do, how encrypted, how secure are those virtual machines?
So. Few answers to that. If you use File Vault, which you should, or if you use, if you just go into the Finder and select that external drive and say encrypt this, it uses the same sort of underlying technology as File Vault, even though File Vault as such is only for startup volumes. That is one really good way to protect your data. Now. Parallels Desktop also has its own built-in encryption engine. So if independently of whether or not you use File Vault, you want to encrypt your virtual machine, you can. And in fact, if you're really hardcore about security, you can substitute Parallels' built-in encryption engine with a third-party encryption engine. If you're like, well, I don't know about Parallel security, but I know this other provider, I really like them and I trust them, and I want to use their encryption for my virtual machine instead, you can do that. So encryption is going to cost you in terms of performance, and it's going to cost probably a little more. Well, that doesn't need to cost more disk space, but the way I would do it personally would just be to encrypt the entire volume in OS X or macOS or whichever version of Apple's operating system you're using. But if you want to just encrypt the virtual machine in Parallels, you can.
Okay. That kind of blows out my list of not concerns but questions over using a virtual machine. What haven't I asked, Joe? What should I know, or what should we tell the folks? Pitfalls, benefits, anything?
It used to be that every year around this time, there would be a new version of Parallels, there would be a new version of VMware Fusion, and there would be this shootout. There would be all these articles in the media about extensive benchmarking and testing and which one's best this year. And one year, Fusion would be a little bit ahead in the tests, and the next year Parallels would be a little bit ahead in the tests. And it's gotten to the point where, I mean, depending on which test you're doing with which operating system, one will be a little faster than the other, but they've both kind of gotten about as fast as they're ever going to get, and they're both pretty close to each other. And it's not just in speed, it's in features too. I often have the sense that with both of them, that the engineers kind of say, well, okay, that was a great update, version 9. What are we going to add for version 10? Is there anything else we really need? And they figure something out. It's like, okay, that was 10. Now we need to do 11. Okay, so now we're up to 12. And, I read you off that list of some of the small enhancements, but it kind of feels like, what else is there to do? You have a complete Windows computer inside your Mac. What more do you want? I mean, they've kind of run out of new things to add, and it's not a criticism. It's not saying, be more creative, come up with it. No, I mean, we have kind of reached, I want to say, pretty close to the pinnacle of virtualization. It's really fast, it's really flexible, it's really reliable, and it may not be as fast as running on bare hardware, but it's probably about as good as it's likely to get in a virtual machine, and that's just fine. So I don't think you should necessarily be depressed that these things aren't getting faster and sexier all the time. They're getting more reliable. They're getting incrementally slightly faster. But that's just because it's a really, really mature technology, and it does what it's supposed to do. So, what you should be thinking about is, how do you feel about the Parallels licensing model? They have, like a light, standard, pro, business, various editions, and they would really prefer that you pay them every year. And as is common for many companies nowadays, and depending on what features you need and how you feel about that, that might have something to do with how which version you get, or whether you choose this over VMware Fusion. But there's almost nothing more to ask, because when I first started writing about this years and years ago, this was such a novelty, and it's like, I can actually run Windows on my Mac, and it's just like this cool new thing. But now it's just like, it's a word processor, like, oh, great, you came up with another word processor. Good for you. Joy, there's a million of them, and word processing isn't interesting anymore. It still needs to be done, sure, but it's no longer exciting or sexy, because word processors can now do everything we've ever thought a word processor should do. So that's kind of that. Yeah,
that the word processor is a great example. But I do love to hear that the virtualization software is becoming more reliable, maybe a little more feature rich, not within the Windows version or whatever, but just the ancillary stuff like the Toolbox you were talking about.
Yeah,
those are some very nice additions, and the fact that I'm assuming that all those utilities work inside the virtual machine. Yeah, that's pretty nice to have, especially if you haven't decided.
Some of them do.
Yeah, well, especially if you haven't.
Some of them just aren't applicable, but yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking of the screen recording stuff. Okay, so you and I have invested in ScreenFlow for the Mac, and that's great. Right. But if I haven't invested in a screen capture program for Windows, and I only need to use Windows maybe 3 times a year, if I have to, then I don't want to invest that money. So, those are nice features too. But the security and the that to me is the biggest question here, is the security of these things, because that seems to be all we talk about anymore, is who's breaking into what, who can hijack what, or introduce what onto your machine that you don't want to have introduced onto your machine.
Yeah.
So, okay. So how about pricing and all of that?
Yeah. So I don't even know what Parallels is charging. I got a free version for writing a book. I don't even know what Parallels itself costs. Go to parallels.com and I'm sure they'll tell you. The book is I'm going to say $15. Must be $15. It's $15. It's a 170-page book. So it's a pretty healthy size book. Take Control of Parallels Desktop, $15 from takecontrolbooks.com. As usual, bundle it with some other books, get a nice discount. And enjoy.
Yeah. And I guess I want to stress, too, that if you're going to do this, you could be opening yourself up to some things. And that's why there's always a really good reason you need one of Joe's books. In my mind, that's one of the big reasons here is just make sure you get those settings right so you know what capabilities you're engaging that you intend to engage and maybe what you're engaging that you might not intend.
Right.
Am I paranoid, Joe?
We should all be at least a little bit paranoid.
Thank you for seeing me, Doctor.
A healthy paranoia helps me sell books, okay?
Yeah. Well, it keeps you safe, too.
Yeah.
Hey, it's great to see you. Thanks so much for the time, and thanks for another great book. We will talk again soon.
Absolutely.
Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is Mac Voices. Again, go and take control of Parallels Desktop 12. If you decide to do virtualization, be safe, and take advantage. Until the next time, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes, links to subscribe, and to connect with Chuck on Twitter, Google+, Facebook, YouTube, Vimeo, SoundCloud, the Mac Voices blog, the Mac Voices Dispatch, our weekly newsletter, and on MacVoices Magazine, free on Flipboard that helps you do more with your Apple tech. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com, bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.